Chapter 2, Part 3. The Host Musters. The black ships lay side by side on the beach. Through the huts and tents of the army rang the voices of criers, calling the heroes to battle at Agamemnon's command. Agamemnon himself, clad in his armor, but holding his silver scepter of lordship instead of his spear, walked down the rows of the huts, inspecting his muster. Where he saw men forward in preparation, he praised them, but if any were still unready for war, he was quick to rebuke. First he came to the tents of Diomede, where the servants were binding the car of a bright painted chariot onto its framework. Beside them, the charioteer was holding two glorious white horses, the leather of whose harness was studded with silver and gold. Diomede himself, by the door of his hut, was putting on his helmet, while out of the tents of his followers, men rushed like a swarm of bees. Next to Diomede stood the great Ajax. His men fought on foot, since they came from a small rocky island unsuited for the breeding of horses. So huge was this hero that the tallest of his men hardly reached the chin strap of his helmet. His great shield of leather and bronze hung by a broad band from his shoulder, covering him almost to the ground. Beside him, scarcely higher than his elbow, stood Teucer, his brother, armed with a bow of polished horn and a quiver of arrows. Teucer bore no armor at all, not even a breastplate, for he hid behind the shield of his brother. Together the two were a deadly pair. Agamemnon passed beyond Ajax and Teucer by noble Odysseus, who was fastening the silver clasps of his greaves around his ankles. Beyond him stood Ajax, the less son of Oileus. His warriors were ready, for they were unarmored slingers and archers. A wolfskin hung round each man's neck by the forepaws and made a rough shield for him. With his left hand, he could stretch the lower edge tight and hold it away from his body to protect him from missiles. Each carried a sling of twisted strips of cloth and a pouch full of stones, or a bow and a quiver of arrows. Agamemnon passed them in silence, caring little for such light-armed fighters who never dared come to close quarters with the ranks of the spearmen. Behind him they murmured because he had not praised their array. Next to these lay the tents of Achilles. Here the servants were rubbing his horses, but he himself sat by the door of his tent, while captive girls brought him wine. Around him the steward served meat to his people, regardless of the voices of the criers and the bustle of the great host mustering for war. "Son of Peleus," cried Agamemnon, halting, "for a long time you have been boasting that you and your people are foremost in the war. Now Ajax and Diomede stand ready, while you sit at your ease. Perhaps you fear to face Hector, lest he prove the better man and rob you of glory. Talk no more to me of your goddess mother. It is deeds, not words, that are needed to prove you goddess-born." The fair young face of Achilles grew grim as the winter. "Speak not to me, shameless king, of my courage," cried he. "I have proved it on Thebe. Where were you when the city was taken, and the king's 7 sons fell to the might of my arm?" "In my place," retorted the king, "at the head of my host." Achilles laughed. "It is a great thing, no doubt, to be king," answered he. "A king stays at the head of his army while he sends other heroes out on expeditions. Yet when they capture cities, he takes the best of the booty, for he is the king." "Does he?" replied Agamemnon, scarlet with anger. "I would not have thought it. Yonder captive youth with the purple and gold on his tunic was never brought forward with the plunder from Thebe, which you spread out for the choice of the king." Achilles rose menacingly. "I kept back no plunder. This youth is not prisoner from there." "Where then did you take him?" Achilles smiled. "The king slept soundly last night," he answered mockingly. "Perhaps in the darkness Hermes, messenger of Zeus, will bring him a dream." "The dreams of kings are important and must not be missed. A mere hero who is son to a goddess has less need of sleep. Know that this youth is Trojan, not Theban. His name is Lycaon, and I caught him this night in an orchard behind Troy on the foothills of Ida, where he was cutting the wild fig shoots which they use for chariot rails." "You have been behind Troy?" cried the king in amazement. "Behind Troy?" said he. "I have been round it. Never again will the Trojans feel safe upon Ida. Anchises' son was out herding their cattle. He left them and fled over the hills, though he never could have escaped me, had it not been for the dark. As it is, I have brought back some booty and this boy, who is Priam's son." "You should have killed him," declared Agamemnon. "We cannot keep prisoners, especially the sons of the king." "He is a child," said Achilles easily. "Can I murder such? I will sell him overseas for a slave if you fear him. But now, O king, I and my men are weary and have not yet eaten. When we go out to battle, you shall witness our valor. But meanwhile, pass on and give orders to men who do not know how to fight for themselves." As Agamemnon choked back his fury, he saw Palamedes, who was encamped next Achilles, laugh with his fellows as he listened to the quarrel. The king went on in silence, for he knew already that Palamedes desired to be commander-in-chief. Out of the tents and huts poured men innumerable as the leaves of an oak tree or as the flowers on the plain of Scamander, where they fought. Athena, daughter of Zeus, had put off her many-colored garments of peace which her own hands had woven, and now stalked through the camp in full armor, inflaming men's hearts, though unseen. Earth groaned like thunder with the drumming of hooves and the thudding of feet, as the heroes in their flashing armor of bronze advanced like a forest fire. On a little mound across the plain, where the view was better than from the walls, stood the swift-footed sentinels of Troy. Now these sped to the city with warning, and the gates opened wide. Out poured the Trojan host, shouting strange cries like a great flock of birds. From the cities of Asia there were kings without number. From the distant steppes came wandering tribes who dressed in skins and lived on Amara's milk. Dark warriors followed their chieftains from far Ethiopia, which was said to lie at the edge of the world. High overhead the invisible gods ranged themselves on this side or that. Above the Greeks hovered Poseidon, the sea king, and with him were Hera, Athena, Hephaestus, and Hermes, and messenger of Zeus. Over the Trojans towered golden Apollo. Beside them stood Ares, Artemis, and Scamander, the god of the yellow river rolling through the Trojan plain. Now Zeus, the father of gods and men, thundered terribly, and the mountain of Ida trembled along all her wooden crest. With a great clash battle was joined. In wild confusion the cries of the victors, the screams of frightened horses, and the groans of the dying mingled on the air. The red plumes of the fighters met and tossed like two racing torrents in flood. On the right hand of the raging battle Diomedes scattered the Trojans, but Hector fell on the Greek center like a lion on a huddle of sheep, driving Agamemnon and Ajax before him until Diomedes ceased from pursuit and returned to their aid. On the left hand the Trojan allies, headed by huge Cycnus, pushed up back the light forces in front of them almost as far as the ships. At this, Achilles, seeing the disaster, called to his Myrmidons, hurled himself into the fray. He came charging out into the battle in a chariot drawn by white horses, looking like the dazzling Apollo himself. The Trojan allies fell back in dismay behind Cycnus, who, vast and unterrified, met the chariot in mid-career. The fearful spear of Achilles, too huge for other men, flashed through the air and burst through Cycnus' shield and breastplate, but he plucked it out with a laugh. Cycnus' own weapon struck the shield of Achilles with such fearful force that its owner staggered, and the charioteer reined his horses to a stop in a cloud of dust, lest his master be hurled to the ground. "Your armor may be the better," mocked Cycnus, "but you need it more. I wear mine merely for show, but I am son of Poseidon, and no weapon can pierce me." He lowered his shield to expose his arm and shoulder. "Take back your spear," said Achilles between his teeth, and he flung it with all his strength. The weapon merely rebounded from Cycnus' uncovered arm without leaving a mark, and Cycnus threw back his head and laughed. Achilles, drawing his sword, hurled himself right over the rail of his chariot onto his foe. "I can at least hew your armor to pieces about your ears," cried he. Suiting the action to the word, he began to batter at the helmet and shield of his enemy with such force and speed that Cycnus gave ground, half stunned, with great fragments of leather on bronze flew into the air. Cycnus dropped the useless remains of his shield and raised his sword to ward off the hail of blows. These now fell on his face and helmet so thickly that he retreated faster and faster, dizzy and blinded, seeking in vain some means of escape. Suddenly he tripped over a loose stone and fell backward. Achilles was on top of him in a moment, his great shield crushing the giant's powerful chest. Dropping his sword, the hero leaned forward and twisted his hands in the straps of his enemy's helmet. "If you cannot bleed, you shall choke to death," gasped he. In another moment all was over. The Trojan allies, seeing their leader dead, fled yelling before the savage Myrmidons. Achilles, stooping over his foe to strip off the remains of his armor, fumbled helplessly for a moment and found himself looking at the bare grass where the body had lain. Though Poseidon could not save his son from a fated death, he would not permit Achilles to triumph over his body. Snatching Caicus away in his arms, he set him down in his home where his friends might give him burial. Achilles looked around and beheld that Hector was once again driving back the Greeks in the center. He stopped the pursuit of the Myrmidons, but before he could bring help, Hector also had recoiled to aid his battered wings. As night was falling, both sides drew back, appalled by the slaughter. The Greeks retreated to their camp and the Trojans to the city. All night long the funeral fires burned by the seashore, while the mourning cries of women rose on the air in Troy. Chapter 4. Troilus and Cressida. The story of Troilus and Cressida describes the Greek prophet Calchas as the Trojan deserter. Being sent on an embassy to the Greeks at Aulis, Calchas learned from the gods in a vision that they considered the Greek cause just and that it would prevail. He therefore threw in his lot with Agamemnon, leaving his countrymen to their fate. The news of this desertion was received in Troy with great anger. Calchas had left his daughter Cressida in the care of her uncle Pandarus. Prudently, she now kept to her house, seeing few people, and was wise enough to appear glad when the Trojans refused to give her up to her father. By such a careful behavior she won friends to protect her, and lived quietly in Troy in spite of the war until Troilus, bravest of the younger princes, fell madly in love with her. It was far from Cressida's intention to attract envy to herself by gaining the love of the strongest and handsomest of Priam's unmarried sons. She was flattered, it is true, but her head was not easily turned, since she never appeared in company. Troilus could not see her out. Now, she would not even walk abroad in the city until the men had gone out to battle. Almost daily, the old men and the women gathered on the city walls to watch the distant struggle between the Greeks and the Trojans on the plain. Cressida hated the publicity of such places, for the former friends of her father looked on her pityingly, and his enemies whispered to one another at her approach. Nevertheless, something drove her, for she had a boundless love for gallantry and daring. Her face would flame with pride when Troilus drove back to the city in triumph, holding up some bright shield or rich breastplate he had stripped from an enemy. Yet when others streamed down to the gates to greet the victorious hero, Cressida veiled her face and went home, lest he should catch sight of her. This care on the part of Cressida did not dampen Troilus's love, but rather inflamed it. Having no chance to speak to his lady, he appealed instead to her uncle, who in her father's absence was her guardian. Pandarus, an ambitious man, was happy to advance his fortunes by a match between his niece, Cressida, and one of Priam's most popular sons. There was a chance that the kingdom might come to Troilus. Already, one of the princes had been captured and two slain. Anything might happen in war. Pandarus secretly encouraged Calchas's enemies to speak openly against Cressida, for he wished an excuse to form a league of Cressida's friends. All went according to plan. The frightened Cressida was easily brought to a gathering of her friends at the house of Prince Deiphobus. Here, the cunning of Pandarus won Troilus some minutes alone with his lady. Cressida, confused and grateful, did not strongly reject him. Another interview brought better understanding, and Cressida admitted her love. There followed a happy time of stolen meetings. Now Cressida sang soft songs as she sat in her loom or combed the bright hair that was her greatest beauty. Every day she smiled down from the walls at Troilus, who would push back his battered helmet from his forehead, glowing with pride. He became a champion of champions. He won a great black shield studded with silver stars, which disappeared after she had carried it in triumph. He had carried it in triumph through the city. Some women whispered that it was to be found in Cressida's hall. Open-handed as Troilus became a saying in Troy at this time. Troilus, who had always been respected in war, was now suddenly popular. Women remarked on his swaggering plumes and his gorgeous armor. Men talked of him as second to Hector. Other princes with ambitions such as dark young Achilles frowned. In this time, Calchas had by no means ceased his efforts to regain his daughter. When an important Trojan noble was finally taken prisoner, he appealed to Agamemnon, who agreed to offer the captive in exchange for Cressida. "I will go on this errand to the Trojans," volunteered the handsome Diomede. "I hear that Cressida is beautiful, and has hair as golden as Helen's. I may earn a smile for her rescue, unless she has a lover in Troy." "Cressida is prudent," replied Calchas easily, "and has lived in retirement, favoring no Trojan. Like a true daughter, she reserves her smiles for her father's friends." King Priam readily agreed to the terms brought by Diomedes, since he was eager to rescue a valiant noble, and cared nothing for Cressida. Hector also consented, though sadly, for he knew of Troilus' secret. "This is hard for the maiden, who wished to remain with us," he said. "I must at least go ahead to break the news." Troilus was actually with Cressida, as his brother had suspected, and nothing would console his mad grief. He clung to his lady, swearing that he would not let her go. Cressida, for her part, was quiet, though very pale. "Trust me," she said to comfort him. "I have not sworn that the sun shall fall from the heavens, and the rocks split on Ida before I betray you." "How shall I live if you leave me?" cried Troilus in agony. "Trust me," she said again. "I know how to deceive my father. I have thought of a story that will persuade him to send me back as soon as he may." How soon?" cried he eagerly, alight with sudden hope. "In 10 days," she answered with confidence. "On the 10th day I swear to return." Troilus pressed her in his arms again, but Hector, his brother, hearing the arrival of Diomede, tore the two lovers apart. Cressida gave a little start of surprise on meeting Diomede. He and Troilus were at first sight much alike. Both were yellow-haired, blue-eyed, and unusually tall, though Diomede was broader and ruddier. He smiled at Cressida with an air of good-humored self-confidence, and Troilus hated him for it. "The lady Cressida is beloved in Troy," said Troilus stiffly. "If any harm happens to her at your hands, beware. I will kill you and throw you to the vultures, even though the whole Greek army stand in my way." "I will make no promises," said Diomede carelessly, amused at the threat. "Promise!" shouted Troilus violently, putting a hand to his sword. "Be quiet, Troilus," said Hector gently. "What harm should he do to her? Remember, he is taking her to her father." Diomede smiled slyly at Cressida, who blushed in annoyance at her lover's ridiculous talk. "I shall go very willingly with Diomede," she said clearly, giving her hand to the Greek. "I am honored that my father sends so valiant a hero." "Cressida!" cried Troilus despairingly. Troilus. She halted, half turned away. "In 10 days?" he questioned. Cressida turned indignantly from him. "You have my word," she said. Troilus and Pandarus were up with the dawn on the 10th morning, and took their stations on the walls above the gate. The Greeks lay encamped far off by their ships, so that there was traffic through the gate all day long, unless the swift watchman from the plain reported that the enemy was advancing to battle. Sheep and oxen grazed outside the walls, and herdsmen in attendance. Women went out to wash clothes in the Scamander. Messengers set forth to the cities who had sent contingents to Priam. The soldiers in the charge of the gate lounged at their ease, since for a long time no one approached. "I see a cloud of dust on the hillside," cried Troilus at last, straining his eyes at the distance. "Why on the hillside?" grumbled Pandarus. "Cressida comes from the shore." "True." His companion fell silent. Pandarus stole a look at him. His lean, long face had sharpened, and there were red rims to his eyes. He moved incessantly, now leaning over the wall, now shading his eyes, now pacing impatiently. Pandarus sighed. "He will kill himself if she does not come," he thought. His heart was heavy, for he loved Troilus, and besides, his own fortunes were at stake. "Someone from the plain!" cried Pandarus sharply. Troilus ran to the wall. "They have relieved the watchman on the mound," he said in disgust. "It is only the man coming home." The sun passed the zenith and sank. The chattering women from Scamander had returned. "She will not come," said Pandarus finally. "Perhaps she could not." "She must come," insisted Troilus. "We will wait till dark." Herdsmen drove in the cattle in the west. The sky was red. Below them the guards were lighting torches and lazily dropping the big bars of the gates into place. Someone had kindled a fire, and a smell of cooking meat arose. It is quite dark now, and the gates are shut," said Pandarus. "She cannot come." She will steal out in the night and batter on the gate for admission. Go home, Pandarus, but let me watch, lest the guards do not open to her. I will stay, groaned Pandarus, shivering in the cold night air. Twice in that long night, a sheep that had escaped the herdsman came wandering across the ground below the wall. The second time it did so, Troilus aroused the watchmen and bade them unbar. Not for Hector himself, said the leader stoutly. It is his own order. The sheep bleated outside with a lost, lonely sound. Troilus drew his sword and set the point to the man's throat. Unbar, he cried. A soldier struck up his weapon, and Pandarus seized him by the arm. Come home, Troilus, he said. Do you hear it is a sheep? She cannot come. She does not wish to come, said Troilus slowly. When I saw her go out with Diomede, I knew it would be so. He turned away from the wall. The next morning Troilus was ill. Even after some days when the fighting was renewed, he lay on his bed and would not stir. Diomede was in the battle, said Pandarus to him that evening. Troilus roused himself at once. She smiled on that great red lout, he said fiercely, remembering. A woman who will deceive her father may betray her lover, too. Did the sun yet fall from the heavens or rocks roll down from Ida? She lied when she swore that oath. Let me die. Troilus turned his face to the wall until Pandarus left him. Nevertheless, his friend had roused him. Anger burned in him all the night, and when day broke, he got to his feet. He was so weak with starvation, however, that he could not bear the weight of his armor. When he saw this, he sank back on his bed and called for wine. The servants brought food and ate it, and he ate it and then immediately fell asleep. He awoke to a great sound of cheering. It is Deiphobus, said the servant, whom he had impatiently summoned. Deiphobus has wounded Diomede and taken his shield. He is bringing it into the city. Troilus felt great disappointment. Deiphobus took the red shield of Diomede? He inquired. The servant hesitated. The shield is black, he said at last, but it is Diomede's. Diomede carries a red shield with a golden boar, said Troilus sharply. Diomedes carried a black shield studded with silver stars today, said Pandarus from the doorway. It is the one Cressida took to the Greek camp with her gear. There was a long silence. The sun has dropped from my heaven, Pandarus, said Troilus heavily. She gave it to Diomede. Is it not so? She has forsaken you, agreed his friend gloomily. Diomedes will recover, and you may yet take your revenge. What use to fight with Diomede if Cressida nurses him? I shall seek out Achilles in battle. His hands give certain death, and it will be better so.